Anyways, the biggest thing that struck me about this week was God's character in comparison with the Babylonian gods. If you read Enuma Elish, no shade if you didn't, Yahweh is just so different from Marduk. It's basically Babylon's version of Zeus. But anyway, Marduk is this snake-scale dragon-like monster god who over time loses the dragon look because it's too creepy, so they make him into a man with a dragon sidekick instead. But according to the Babylonians, the creation of the world starts with this massive battle between the gods. Apsu and Tiamat, basically their version of Uranus and Gaia, have kids, but then Apsu gets tired of all their noise. So Apsu wants his kids to all get murked, but instead, Marduk murders his own father and war begins. Basically, he eventually kills his own mom too, and the earth is born by him smashing his mom's skull in and sawing her in half to create the heavens and the earth. It's like literally what the frick is happening. He then cuts open his brother's arteries to create humankind, and the only purpose humans are given is to feed the gods so they can spend eternity being bums in the sky. And that's it. So heaven and earth are born out of violence. Super long story that glorifies killing your own parents and shows it's okay to enslave humans. But if you compare it with our Bible, God creates the entire world in 14 sentences. Humanity is the pinnacle of creation, and we co-rule with the Lord, not a footnote that glorifies slave labor. And also, the biggest thing that struck me was that God is not a violent warrior king. He's just straight up a gardener. Like, take a second and look at all these crazy plants that he came up with. This one's my favorite. It's called the monkey puzzle tree. Super cool. But the fact that God is a gardener communicates a completely different set of values to people than if the world was born out of violence, like the Babylonians version. I know we get caught up in the evolution stuff and the other things that the Bible is simply too vague to have a stance on, but one thing is very clear. Whoever wrote Genesis 1 was seriously speaking truth to power by showing how much Yahweh stands in contrast to his quote-unquote contemporaries. Just as a case study, like for instance, when Cain kills Abel, it makes God furious, right? He firmly communicates that he's anti-murder, which makes sense because why would the gardener want his garden to be stained with the blood of innocent people, or his canvas to be tarnished by our tendency towards violence? Just as any gardener fights for the health of what they have planted, so God will not rest until his garden is once again a place of peace. But if Marduk was the god of the Cain and Abel story, he'd probably throw Cain a feast for eliminating the competition. But since Genesis 3:15, the first prophecy of the Messiah, he's been acting in history to shape a people that can co-labor with him in the garden. Because we're so used to violence driving our actions, sometimes we're confronted by him to face the consequences of what we've done, to become the gardeners he always wanted us to be. Cain is spared by God, but spends his life in constant fear. Abraham's the father of nations, but has to let go of his firstborn son, and is tested to sacrifice his second. He has to watch Isaac be brought through death because his choices forced Hagar to watch Ishmael be brought through his. And not long from now, we'll read about how Pharaoh is given 10 chances to repent, but instead his army drowns in the waters of the sea, the same way his father drowned the Hebrew babies of the Nile. Our gardener just has a completely different vision for how life ought to be than what Babylon tells us life is. He created a world of harmony and peace, a place where we can dwell together with him and enjoy the wonderful garden he tends to with love and care. And his garden is so intricate and imaginative, like I could never have come up with these plants myself. But it shows us that who we serve is someone who's incredibly tender. Like the elderly Asian man who owns a rock garden and spends time every day trimming the edges of his plants, slowly strolling through and raking the sand, bending down and running his fingers over the moss on the rocks, looking fulfilled and at peace. Or my mom, who never smiles wider than when she's in our garden in the backyard. You can see the tension in her face evaporate the second she sniffs the lavenders. It's her way of fighting back against this evil world by creating a place of beauty in a world of darkness. God's like that, a gardener.
Whoa.
And he's planting a garden more beautiful than we can ever imagine for us all to live in someday. So whenever we start spinning out, what if we just went outside and stared at a single plant or a single tree? What if we just ran our fingers over what the gardener has planted?